off right, ladies and gentlemen. So, speaking of kicking it off, we have our first speaker coming up. His name is Tom Campbell. Maybe you guys have heard of him. I'm not sure. Kind of a well known guy, I'm told. Tom is amazing. He is absolutely awesome. He joined us for a Open Tables stream. If you guys haven't had a chance to catch that, our Open Tables live stream with Tom, that was an amazing conversation. I was kind of a little bit of a fanboy, not gonna lie. Uh, it's amazing when you get to talk to people that you've really celebrated as celebrities. You know, it's mind blowing, and they're real people. They're just like you and I. It's really amazing. Like this man right here, Thomas W. Campbell, is the author of My Big Toe trilogy. Wait, are we talking about toes? What's this got to do with feet? Theory of everything. Unifies science and philosophy, physics, metaphysics, mind and matter, purpose and meaning, the normal and the paranormal. My favorite, of course. As well as shines a light on the common spiritual basis of the world's major religions while placing belief, dogma, and creed into a bigger picture. Tom worked as a former NASA physicist. If I could read, ladies and gentlemen, this would go a lot smoother, wouldn't it? As a former NASA physicist, Tom worked as a large complex system analyst by day and collected evidential information in the larger consciousness system by night. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome Tom Campbell.
Yes, thank you very much. Um, the the title of my talk, the last schedule I looked at, it said my talk was titled TBD, but that's not actually the title of my talk. It is the Mandela Effect, a natural artifact of the nature of consciousness. Now, I am a physicist, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about physics, but it's not going to be physics, so relax. This is something everybody, I think, can understand. I'm going to go into a little bit of history of how science and consciousness have been entangled for the last 100 years, and then talk about the Mandela effect and exactly what's going on there, and why do we have these things that are so unexpected show up in our life. Our reality seem to bend and twist here and there, experiences that just don't make any good sense. Where do they come from, and why do they happen, and what's the point behind them? All right, we'll start with a little history. 100 years ago, physicists created the science of quantum physics to better understand and explain the double slit experiment. They were ecstatic about the new breakthrough. Surprisingly, matter, materialism, and determinism did not describe the fundamental structure of reality after all. Although materialism was clearly wrong, its alternative appeared both mysterious and elusive. Most of those at the forefront of creating this new science agreed that the fundamental structure of reality had something to do with information and consciousness, but they couldn't come up with any sort of theory that was rational. However, the mathematical formulation of quantum theory grew quickly, while fundamental understanding of what, how, and why made no progress at all. How could a probability wave collapse to become a physical particle? They knew that what was required was a new perspective, a major paradigm shift, a different point of view, something fundamental, and thus something simple and elegant. And with this new perspective, everything would come together in one coherent understanding. Because quantum physics and relativity were logically incompatible and limited in scope, it was clear that there was some overall, more fundamental understanding from which both relativity and quantum physics could be derived. In pursuit of this goal, Albert Einstein coined the phrase theory of everything, acronym TOE, TOE. and he started working on a little toe. He called it unified field theory. Well, he failed after about 23 years of the last part of his career. He failed. So did everyone else who came after him. The result was 30 years later, no one had any idea of where to start, much less how to proceed. From his static breakthrough to dead silence, everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop, that new perspective that would elucidate all. But it never did. Physicists knew they needed a different way of looking at reality, a new paradigm. But after 7 decades of trying, they gave up, banging their heads against that intractable wall, and did the next best thing. They simply denied that there was a problem. Their conclusion: problem? What problem? Quantum science is just a naturally weird science. No one will ever understand the mystery of quantum physics. Mother Nature simply has some secrets she means to keep. Fortunately, we have the math, so we don't need to understand why. Well, next came a backward leap by physicists to renew their embrace of materialism and determinism. Shut up and calculate became the mantra of moving forward, the way to hide defeat, claim victory, and move on. And that's still where the science of physics is today. However, a few of the best persevered throughout this regression. For example, two of the best physicists, Edward Fredkin and John Archibald Wheeler, claimed that our reality was discrete and computable. The term "it from bit" was coined. The participatory universe was talked about. This provided a new perspective that claimed our reality was information based, and a significant minority of physicists agreed with them. Unfortunately, as before, after stating the obvious, nobody knew how to proceed. At least, for these physicists, the wall, understanding the nature of reality, was still a challenge, still worth thinking about. Now, 100 years have gone by since the inception of quantum physics, and no new understanding or new perspective has arisen until now. But first, consider this. If this new perspective is so impossibly difficult to find, it must be totally off the wall paradigm shift that for some reason is impossible for mainstream physicists to even imagine. Furthermore, it must be entirely outside of materialism because that is where everybody has been looking in vain for a century. Thus, the conclusion is, if this new perspective didn't sound a little bit wild and crazy, it couldn't possibly be true. Science moved on. Eventually, parapsychology became an accepted thing, remote viewing went to the Pentagon, and a tsunami of other studies in reputable universities and other places revealed high quality, repeatable psi experiments. And if this is news to you, you should read some of Dean Radin's books. With the closed door of materialism cracked open just a little bit by the serious study of paranormal experiences, we also learned about NDEs, near-death experiences, crop circles, high-functioning people without brains, and accurate past life knowledge in young children, and of course, the Mandela Effect. Eventually, a host of paradoxes, new and old, like the placebo effect, continued to pop up in both the soft and hard sciences. For the most part, mainstream scientists reacted to this influx of broader thinking by closing both their eyes and their minds, sticking their fingers in their ears, and declaring that everybody but us seems to be hallucinating. Now, here I am, a physicist, and why am I so different from my brethren? What is a nice physicist like me doing in a conference discussing the Mandela Effect? I am an unusual physicist because although I had a very successful 35-year career as a professional physicist, it's my day job, I also had a 50-year and continuing career as a consciousness researcher. And that was my night job. To make a long story very, very short, in graduate school, I had a mind-opening psi experience. Then, eventually, I hooked up with Bob Monroe. Um, Maybe I shouldn't have used that term. I think hooked up means something different these days. But back in 1972, what it meant was a connection. That's a metaphor that comes from the old days when telephones were hooked up by a lady with a bunch of phone plugs and a wall full of sockets to plug them into. In any case, I learned how to go out of body on demand and with enough consistency and precision that I could do research on the nature of consciousness and reality from within the non physical realm of the larger consciousness system. That is long and tedious work. You do something paranormal that's evidential, like remote view or heal, or something that leaves evidence here so you can tell whether you were effective or whether you got it right or not. And then you change a parameter and see how that affects the result, and then change another parameter and so on. And then, you keep doing this by changing parameters, keeping the other ones constant until you see what affects what and how does it work? What are its boundaries? So that was the science that I'm talking about. It was primarily this capability to do the science in the non physical that enabled me to eventually discover that new perspective, that new paradigm that science had been seeking for a century. After 25 years of research within the non physical realm of consciousness, yes, 25 years, it is a slow, tedious process. I thought I finally understood how and why consciousness worked. I published My Big Toe in February 2003, and a few years after that, I also could derive both quantum physics and relativity from consciousness, from understanding consciousness. The same principles that explain consciousness also allows you to understand physics. By 2016, I had solved all the outstanding paradoxes I could find in science and biology and elsewhere. And I presented 5 new quantum physics experiments in Los Angeles to a group of people. And these experiments were to provide evidence for this new theory of mine. And I had the new paradigms for a more advanced physics wrapped up by that time. Now, just as an aside, if you want to learn how to explore the larger consciousness system and experience the paranormal firsthand, you can find the tools to do so at my website. I have a whole assortment of various tools that will enable you to do this. Everybody can do what I have done. It's not that there's something special about me. And you don't really have to learn anything new. What you have to do is learn how to get rid of things that are old. It's the things you carry around with you that block, not that you have to know a new set of skills or you know any magic words or something. You just have to stop blocking it. You are consciousness. You can explore consciousness. It's a natural thing. Anyway, the founding fathers of quantum physics were correct. The mysterious wave function collapse did indeed have something to do with consciousness and information. These new paradigms are both elegant and simple and made absolutely everything make sense. They generate a new and more general physics that more fully and more accurately describes the objective world, as well as provide a fundamental new science of the subjective world, something that we've never had before. Past and current fundamental paradoxes are now solved with no new paradoxes created. All of this with only one assumption, and that is that consciousness exists. The rest of it after that is all logic, mostly deductive logic. Consciousness is simply defined as awareness with a choice. This fundamental foundational understanding requires neither physics nor math as a prerequisite. Foundations are usually simple, elegant, and straightforward. Then complexity is built upon them. When the foundation shifts, everything above it must shift as well. This paradigm shift is much, much larger than any before it. It has to be because of how difficult it has been to find it and how dramatically it will change every individual's worldview. It is not just about science. It's also strongly impacts everyday life and purpose. So, what feedback have I had from the other physicists? Well, still mostly silence, except for a trickle of individuals who have taken the time to understand this new perspective. Granted, it is extremely difficult for most to grasp this new perspective, not because it's inherently difficult, but because it runs so counter to our cultural, technical, and philosophical beliefs. However, there's lots of supporting interest from engineering, computer science, and medicine. These folks aren't so much worried about the theory behind it all. They just want to know, does it work? And other fields too. I have a very unusual, kind of an eclectic group of people who come into this understanding from all walks of life and all sorts of professions. Some not professional, some as young as 10 years old. It's my youngest person I know of, read the books and can discuss them intelligently. Um, More men than women. The typical age is somewhere in the 40s to 50s. So that's kind of the group that so far has centered around this. Okay, in 2018, I published a peer-reviewed paper in the Journal of International Quantum Foundations, co-authored by a Caltech mathematician and a JPL physicist, that presented a set of quantum mechanics experiments that could provide some evidence for my theory. I have a YouTube channel with over 82,000 subscribers and well over 10 million views. It's a growing thing. I have a new website that will fill in the details that I don't have time to discuss here. And you'll find that at www.my-big-toe.com. So I want to pause here for a little advertisement, just like YouTube, right? The experiments are funded and managed by a seriously underfunded 501c3 nonprofit, tax-deductible charitable organization called CUSAC. That's an acronym for Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness. And you can go to it with a www.cusac.org. Actually, you don't even need the three W's, just cusac.org will work. We are near now to having the first experiment done at two universities. One university tells me within weeks they will have it done, and I hope this is true. Unfortunately, I've heard them say that before, and it didn't work out. All right, the next experiment after this first one is done is even more expensive, and we could use some financial help. So if you know anybody out there who happens to have more money than they need, this is a very good cause. All right. Question: how does one tell if a theory is good or bad? Now, I listened to Richard Feynman, a very famous physicist, in a lecture that he was giving to beginning physics majors. And he described to those physics majors a time when the very best and brightest of us humans put forth the theory that the heavenly bodies were pushed through their orbits by angels. He asked his class, how does one know that this is not a good theory? Very quickly, a reply from a boy in the back in the audience said, because it's stupid. Feynman said, no, a theory is not judged wrong because it doesn't support our current beliefs. And our current knowledge is exactly the same thing as our current beliefs. It could be wrong. A theory is judged wrong if it explains little, requires too many assumptions, and creates more unknowns. A theory is good if it explains all the known facts, accurately predicts new facts, creates no more unknowns, and requires very few assumptions. Now, this statement by Feynman represents good science, but unfortunately, it does not represent current reality. Political correctness and deeply held beliefs dominate the mainstream within our culture and within a largely insular academia. Unfortunately, new theories today are mainly judged according to how well they support current beliefs. This theory of consciousness and reality provides a more general physics of the objective world, a brand new science of the subjective world. It explains the source of the fundamental physical parameters such as mass, time, space, charge, etc. It explains what preceded the Big Bang, the anthropic principle, small variations in the speed of light, particle tunneling, non-random biological mutations, chaos theory, Libet's readiness potential, psi phenomena, and provides new insight into Freud's theory of mind, the Fermi paradox, the accelerating universe, ontology, epistemology, cosmology, theology, and philosophy. It finally ends the argument between idealists and realists, and it provides insight into the Mandela Effect. This model of reality, or TOE, is simple and elegant. Previous complex and difficult problems reduced to simple problems with obvious solutions. So far, no fundamental problem has been found that this theory cannot clearly solve. We have tried for years to find issues. So far, none. Also, it creates no additional problems. Bottom line, it is very unlikely that this TOE could achieve the level of success it has achieved without being largely correct. I and many others are convinced that this TOE will one day be adopted by mainstream science because it simply represents better physics. The truth is not a fragile thing. It will eventually rise to the top of the pile of competing ideas. And when it does, this understanding will change everything. Now, I'm going to tell you very, very quickly what this new paradigm is. Not to the detail that would be required for you to truly understand it, because that would take probably 3 or 4 hours to get to that point, and maybe 3 or 4 days if I really work to detail. But anyway, to vastly oversimplify, here it is. The new paradigm posits that consciousness is fundamental. I call this system of consciousness the larger consciousness system, LCS. And it states that this system is most accurately modeled as an information system. Well, that's not too hard to imagine, since what you're aware of, what you're conscious of, is just information. It's the data you take in through your 5 senses. Get rid of those 5 senses, get rid of that data, and what's your reality? What are you conscious of? Only that you exist. It also claims that we are individuated units of this consciousness. I call those IUOCs, somewhat like a virtual machine within a mainframe. And we are these individual units of consciousness playing human avatars within a virtual reality multiplayer game evolved by the larger consciousness system to facilitate its own survival through the positive evolution of both individuals and the system. Now, I've crammed a whole lot of information into one paragraph there, and I know it would take you some time to sort all that out and decompress it, but here's just a few of the logical consequences. Consciousness is an information system that evolves by lowering its entropy. I can make that reasonable, I think, in a few seconds. Think of an information system where all the bits are random. How much information does it have? None, because all the bits are random. Order those bits, and that ordering is information. Therefore, ordering creates information. Now, entropy is a measure of disorder. So low entropy is a system that's ordering things. High entropy system is one that's not ordering things, disordering things. Okay. Consciousness is also a social system, and social systems can most effectively lower their entropy through cooperation, caring, helping others, what I term love-based. Love is about others. Thus, consciousness evolves positively by making love-based choices. Consciousness de-evolves by making fear-based choices. That's ego, belief, self-centeredness. Fear is about self. Yes, fear is the opposite of love. Individual evolution feeds system evolution. The larger consciousness system is incentivized to help its individuated units of consciousness to evolve positively, lower their entropy, raise their quality. Now, let's move on to the Mandela Effect. If I hadn't spent the last half hour, I guess it's about a half hour, if I haven't spent the last half hour explaining where I'm coming from, many of you would have judged my comments about the Mandela Effect to be no more than unsubstantiated assertions. You may still feel that way, but hopefully, in the short time provided, I've given you enough background information for you to at least tentatively accept my assessment as possibly credible. The Mandela Effect has an assortment of probable causes. There is not just one cause. And I'm going to give you 4 ways that the nature of consciousness and reality causes the Mandela Effect. This is the first one. We each live in our own reality. There is not just one reality for everyone. How we interpret the data stream we receive from the virtual reality server creates our personal reality. Okay. Now, if you take in that fact, then you should understand that beliefs and attitudes, experience and understanding, fear, needs, and expectations modify both our personal reality and our memory of our reality. Okay? So each of us lives in our own reality. That reality is how we interpret the information we get. Remember, I said this is a virtual reality. You are a piece of consciousness. You are playing a human avatar. That means you make all the choices for your avatar. By those choices, if those choices are good choices, those choices lower entropy for yourself in the system, then you evolve. You help evolve yourself, and as you evolve, the larger system evolves because you're just a part of this larger system. Yes, we are all one. We're all part of this larger system. Next, therefore, since beliefs and attitudes, experience, fear, needs, expectations modify both our reality and our memory of reality, it's kind of easy to see how that might, affect the Mandela effect. Therefore, those with similar cultures and attitudes will have more similar realities. So if we look at things that are similar and dissimilar, let's just look at gender. Okay. If we look at groups of female gender, then their reality should be more similar to each other. And if we look at groups of males, their reality will be similar to each other because they have similar attitudes and ideas and ways of looking at the world. And of course, is it not obvious that men and women live in different realities? I think everybody would have to agree with that. They do. Same with with largely different economic constraints. The poor and the rich live in different realities. They don't just live don't have just different experiences in the same reality. That's what we believe. That's what materialism would tell us. they actually live in different realities. Remember, this is a virtual reality. There is no fundamental one reality for all, only a multiplayer game that tracks interactions. The virtual reality itself exists only in the minds of the individual players. The virtual reality itself exists only in the minds of the individual players. Understanding that, and you immediately know why there's the observer paradox in quantum physics. How is it that what a person knows about the which way data in that experiment changes the experiment? That's because this is a VR, and it only exists in the minds of the players. If there is no player getting the information, that is the observer getting the information, then nothing can come into this reality. All right. What is real? That's part of your question here. One of your fundamental questions is, what is real? Consciousness is fundamental and real. Other than that, only information is real. Nothing is more real than information. Reality equals information. All right, next. This is the second. So that's the first way that the Mandela effect, comes into being, is that we don't share a single reality, and the reality that we get is modified, and our memory of it is modified by our beliefs and attitudes, our experience, our understanding, our fear, our needs, our expectations. Okay. 2, the second way that the Mandela effect comes about is that our mind and memory work by pattern matching the data we receive with our experience base. In other words, we receive data. We have to interpret that data, and we interpret it by pattern matching it to our experience base, what we've already experienced. So somebody holds up a little red thing with a stem out of the top, and we pattern match that and say, oh, that's an apple, because we have an apple in our experience base that we can pattern match and identify it. If we've never heard of, seen a picture of, or know anything about apples, we would not come to that conclusion. We might say, well, it's a misshapen ball of some sort with a little string coming out of it. So that's how we work. Mind and memory work by pattern matching. All right. Think what that means. Here's an example. Here, I got 2 examples for you. One, there are literally millions of people, and we all know many of them, that have a name that ends in Stein, or some pronounce it Steen, Epstein, Goldstein, lots of names. You can probably think of 10 of them right off the top of your head. Now, when you see a name that ends in Stain, all that's happened is that E in Stein is replaced by an A. You will see that when you pattern match that, you will see that stain at the end of that name, and it will come right out into your reality as a Stein or a Steen, however you want to pronounce that. That's just the way our mind works. In your reality, your own personal reality, the words you saw was Bernstein, or not Bernstein. Okay? So, an example of this is, you've probably seen it. This thing has circulated around the internet for years, and that is, you'll find a paragraph that has about 10, 12 lines in it. And what this person who put this up did is that every word that had more than 4 letters in it, and most of the words did, they kept the first 2 letters and the last 2 letters of that word, and then randomly mixed up all the other letters in between. Took all the letters that were in between the first 2 and the last 2 and just jumbled them. Okay? And then they asked people, they had this whole paragraph that was made that way. And then they asked people, said, well, can you read this paragraph? And how it turned out was that almost everybody could read the paragraph without any trouble at all because they pattern match. And a majority of the people who read the paragraph did not even notice that any of the words were misspelled. They didn't notice it. They just read it and knew what it said. And it wasn't until later when the words down below says, go back and look at it again, and here's what we've done. And that was just an example of pattern matching. Didn't even notice that any of the words were misspelled. Our brain looks at it, finds the pattern, and it can do that with just the first two and last two letters. And that's what it sees. That word becomes whole and correct in our mind and in our reality, because what we take in the data is what creates our personal reality. Okay, that's the second thing that helps cause this Mandela effect. The third thing that causes the Mandela effect is collective consciousness, sometimes called groupthink. Collective consciousness is the vector sum of all the individual consciousness that represent members of a particular group. Now, this collective consciousness forms around any group. Okay. Now, that group could be small. It could just be your family. If you have a family with a strong internal, binding force in your family, then your family has a collective consciousness. You'll find it in the organizations you belong to. If you belong to a club or the religion you belong to, or even the church you belong to, or the corporation you work for. Now we call that, when it gets a little larger, we call that culture, corporate culture. Corporate culture and any culture, national culture, regional culture, all of that is just collective consciousness. Okay, you may be aware of Carl Jung's work. He talked about archetypes, and these archetypes were no more than collective consciousness. Okay, culture itself is just a collective consciousness. Fads are driven by excitement within the collective consciousness. A lot of people get excited about a thing that spreads. Now, the thing about collective consciousness is that a collective consciousness may impose ideas, attitudes, and beliefs on us. As we belong to a group, our consciousness adds to that group, and it'll change it just a little, but because we're one among many, it doesn't change it much. But that collective consciousness will start to change us. Now, it doesn't force us, it just very slowly nudges us in the direction of the collective. It has that kind of effect on us. Okay? So it may impose ideas, attitudes, and beliefs on us. Collective consciousness can also contain misinformation in the form of attitudes and beliefs. Your memory, your attitudes and beliefs are shaped and modified by the collective memory, attitudes, and beliefs of every group to which you belong. Here's a common example of a collective consciousness. It's that we call a mob. A mob is a bunch of angry people. Now that mob will do things that are much worse than any one of the members of that mob would ever do by themselves. Why is that? A mob is a bunch of angry people, and that collective consciousness, all that anger then feeds back and makes them more angry. In other words, if you're one of 10 people in a mob, then the other 9 people, their anger makes your anger grow. You get that out of the collective consciousness. And it works the other way around. If you are around a bunch of highly evolved, very grown up, selfless, nice people, very positive people, it will help pull you up. If you hang out with people like that, you'll just feel lighter and better just for having been around them. collective consciousness affects you. If you work for IBM, then there's a certain dress codes you wear. Nobody tells you you have to wear a white shirt and, these kinds of slacks, or nobody tells you you have to wear a hat. But you just, even when you start, if you don't do those things, eventually you'll just start doing them too, like everybody else, along with your attitudes, the things you believe. So that's collective consciousness. It affects us. Okay. Um, so now you know why all those people got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to stand in line to buy a Beanie Baby. It's because the collective consciousness was telling them that they just had to have one. And they didn't have any rational reason for doing all that, but they got one anyway because everybody else did. Collective consciousness affects us. So it's pretty obvious how that might be a part of the Mandela effect, how certain groups would see things one way and different groups would see things a different way. Okay? Now, the last way, and I think this is probably the major way, I think this has more of an effect than the others, is that the larger consciousness system may add or subtract data into or from your data stream. Remember, your reality is created by your interpretation of that data stream. And the larger conscious system will do that if it thinks that it will help an individual or group to increase the quality of their consciousness. So what it does is it bumps them out of their conceptual rut by putting a little data in or taking a little data out of their consciousness. It's just trying to open a door to a larger reality. And if the larger conscious system thinks it can do that, it will. Remember, one of our little logical results that I said was that the larger consciousness system is incentivized to help us evolve because our evolution is its evolution. We're it. Okay. So what this means is that the progression of reality, quite intentionally, does not always follow the rules. Strange, inexplicable, and paranormal things happen much more often and to many more people, including small and large groups, than you think. And I have some examples here. I'll try to be quick with them. I hear a lot of strange stories, and I tend to investigate them and make sure that they're honest and not somebody making things up or a bad dream or something like that. But I know of incidents where a young lady was driving her car. It was the middle of the day. She was not tired. She did not do drugs. You know, it was she was wide awake, knew exactly where she was doing, where she was going. She was paying attention to her driving. She was on a 4-lane highway, and an older couple in a large car just drifted right out in front of her from a side street. She braced herself for the crash, and a big flash of light occurred. She found herself on the other side of the intersection, on the side of the street, looked in the rearview mirror, and there that old couple in that car was just pulling into the other lane and continuing on their way like nothing happened. I've heard dozens of stories like that. The reason I hear them is people come up to me and say things like, I've never shared this with anybody because people would think I was crazy, but here's what happened to me. So I get a lot of those stories. And when I question them about the circumstances, most of them are very credible. These are sane, uh, you know, logical people who are smart, and they've just had these experiences. I talked to two people. That was two of a group that were uh, playing cards before they had an appointment, like they were going to a movie or something, uh, and they noticed the sound of helicopters going over the house, and then another helicopter flying by, and so on. So they said, "What's going on?" And they went outside. And when they went outside, they saw that a lot of people were out standing in their front yards, and there was a huge fire. It looked like maybe 4 or 5 miles away, but it was big. A big chemical plant was on fire. Helicopters were dumping fire retardant on it, and you could see this fire for a long way, and the smoke was going up high, made a huge, display. The flames were leaping up probably 200 or 300 feet in the air, and sirens were wailing. It was just a really big disaster. And they talked to their neighbor, and they said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, there was an explosion at the big chemical plant." So they looked for a while, and then they went back inside and they turned on their television, and it was all over the news. Every local station was running the news of this event. Well, eventually they had to go to their appointment. They went. It took a couple hours. They came back, and when they came back, they saw that the fire was out. And they thought, well, that's good. And they saw their neighbor was outside putting hoses away, and they went over to the neighbor and said, how, how long did it take to put the fire out? And the neighbor looked at it and said, "Fire? What fire?" And they said, "Well, there was a big fire in the chemical plant, and I was standing right here and I talked to you about it." And they said, "No, what you're talking about." So they went to another neighbor that they thought it was impossible for this other neighbor to put them on like that, to pull their chain that way. And they verified the same thing. They didn't have any idea what was going on. They went back inside and turned up the news. No news, no record of it. Nobody knew anything about it. Nobody was talking about it. Next day in the paper, nothing about it. Yet they were there, 5 of them, and they saw it. Okay. Um, let's see. Here would be another one. That probably everybody knows. There's lots of people see ETs and UFOs, and I even had a personal experience. I think that was just for this course, just for this convention that you're having. I was thinking about doing this and what I was going to say. So the system gave me a little bump in my reality just so I'd have a firsthand story to tell. And it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big thing. But what happened was that about 4 months ago, we cleaned up our cupboards. And when we did, we found out that we had all kinds of things that we had bought, didn't know we had it, bought another one, that sort of thing. So we cleaned up our closet, like the closet that had all our pharmaceuticals in it, like nasal sprays and that kind of stuff. And we found out we had like 5 bottles of nasal spray, all of them partly used. And you know how that is. You clean up a cupboard and you find things like that. So I was going through them and I noticed this one, which was old and didn't have much in it. And it was called Four Way. So I looked at it, I looked at the ingredients, and indeed it had 4 ingredients in it. And I wondered if any of those ingredients were the kind that you can get addicted to, that if you use it too long, then your nose is always stuffy unless you use it. So I read them out to my wife, and we looked on all the other bottles to see whether the ingredients of those 4 ingredients were also found in the other bottles that we had of nasal spray, all of them different brands. And 3 of them were, and one of them was unique. So that was interesting. We just like to keep track of things like that because if you think you're only getting so much of a particular ingredient, but you're trying different products, then you need to know whether the same ingredients are in different products so you don't think you get too much of it. So anyhow, we did that, and about 4 months later, my nose was stuffy again, and I got this thing out, but I couldn't remember whether it had good or bad ingredient, whether the ingredients were good or bad. So again, my wife's lying in the bed, and I call out these ingredients to her, and of course, I'm not saying them so much as I'm spelling them because I can't pronounce most of those, chemical names that have like 15 letters in them. So I'm spelling them out to her. Well, finally, I used up all of the nasal spray that was in that little bottle that said Four-Way. So I said, "Pamela, let's get another bottle of that. That worked very well." So she did. We took the old bottle, set it down next to her computer so she could look at it. We buy everything online. We don't go to stores anymore. We just do things on the computer. So I had this sitting next to her computer, and she saw it, and she went out and found it and bought it. And a couple of days later, it shows up at the house, and I look at it, and I look at the ingredients. There's only one ingredient in it, and I go, oh no, we got the wrong version of it. We didn't get the right one. So I, go over and the old bottle still sitting there. It was old and had some stains on it and whatever. And I picked that old bottle up and looked at it, and it had just one ingredient. Just one ingredient. That's all. And I thought, that's impossible. I've read these off. Pamela and I couldn't have, I couldn't have made all those names up in my mind if I'd wanted to. So how did that happen? Well, that's the way this works. The system can add and subtract data and change your reality. That's what's going on in all those examples. Okay. So my reality shifted there for a few months, and it always had 4 ingredients in it for about those 4 months. And then I got connected back to the mainstream reality where it just had one ingredient in it. And probably if I checked, it always had one ingredient in it. Well, how does that work? The system just having a little fun with me, saying, here's an example. Okay, now also, the larger consciousness system sometimes creates individual and collective events and artifacts that challenge our beliefs in a material reality, just to wake us up, to open our minds to a larger, more vital and purposeful reality. Hugely complex crop circle patterns form overnight in the dark, and that happens in multiple parts of the world. Of course, we look at that and we don't understand, how could that possibly happen? Humans couldn't do that. So we say, ETs do it. Well, that's just because we don't know what else to say. I think the larger conscious system does that to help wake us up. ET contact, the UFOs, and now the Mandela Effect all seem to be one of these mass effects that the larger consciousness system gives to us to help crack our minds open a bit and let us see that reality is bigger, more complex, more interesting, and more vital than what the materialist would have us believe. It's not this one reality. It's all buttoned down that follows the rules of physics. Okay. Now, people everywhere try to explain the unexplainable with the materialist paradigm, since that's the only acceptable paradigm to explain anything with. But they usually fail to do so with sufficient scientific rigor. Eventually, with no good quality explanation, these searchers for the truth wake up to the possibility of a bigger picture. And that is the whole point. Opening your mind to a bigger picture, growing your set of possibilities until they can support the truth. Because the truth will greatly help you lower the entropy of your consciousness and the consciousness of the system, which is the larger consciousness system's most important goal. Now, the conclusion is that the Mandela Effect is simply a natural artifact of consciousness and the nature of reality. It is part of the larger consciousness system strategy to open minds to a larger reality that lies beyond dead-end materialism, and to improve the individual and collective quality of consciousness by nudging those who are ready to see a more vibrant, interesting world out of their habitual mental ruts. Now, those of you who are here studying the Mandela Effect, think about that in your own, how does that affect you? I bet that most of you are having your mind cracked open a bit, that you're interested in this effect, that you found a reality, you found information here that you couldn't just throw away. You had to investigate it. You had to, you had to get involved and get to the bottom of this mystery. Well, what it's done is it's opened your mind. you realize that reality is not just a neat little package of materialism. It's bigger than that. And that will help you grow. That will help you become more. So that's it. That is my talk. I hope you've gotten something out of it. I hope I didn't bore you with too much physics talk. I know physics talk is not a popular thing, but hopefully that will start your meeting off with something to think about. So thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and I'll be here for the rest of the day, and I'll be open for questions.
Quick, Tom?
Pardon?
Are you going to stick around for a Q&A real quick? We got some
Sure.
questions for our audience.
Absolutely. I'll be here for the Q&A, and I'll be back for the thing at the group panel thing at the end of the day.
So we will have a panel there. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and get a quick response from the audience. Tom, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Campbell. Maybe they liked it, Tom. I know I enjoyed it, but do we have any questions? If you do, come up to the microphone right here on the other side, and Tom should be able to hear you clearly. John, go ahead.
Tom, can you hear me okay?
I do.
Excellent. Thank you for that great information. So I've jotted down some thoughts here. So a phenomenon is something that is essentially unexplainable. And so when we're trying to explain this Mandela effect to people, I call them the unconvinced. They work overtime to try to put what to us is a phenomenon into this naturalistic box. Oh, I can clear this up, John. You know, this is just misremembering. So they're suggesting that this is just the normal course of everyday events in human history, that misremembering has always been happening. And this is very frustrating because although we may not know exactly what it is we're experiencing, we know what it isn't. It isn't misremembering. Okay, I meet Joe at the Christmas party and I say, hey, Joe, and he says, oh, no, my name is John or Jim. And I say, that's misremembering, but what we're experiencing is very different than that. So of course, your work is amazing, and your attempt to quantify and explain this phenomenon, so it essentially is no longer a phenomenon, is very appreciated. But my question is, I'm a little confused by your section called what's the cause of the Mandela effect? So item number 2, you spoke about memory matching, and item number 3, the collective consciousness, which to me sounded just like the unconvinced. They're trying to say, oh, you're just misremembering, you're just confusing the Planters peanut guy with the Monopoly guy. And we're like, no, it's not that. So what I'm asking for is just a little clarification, because my observation is that this type of experience has never happened in recorded history before. All of my life, these things weren't in my Bible, you know, mirror, mirror on the wall. All this event is a new experience. So how do you frame this in terms of, you know, we're experiencing what is a new phenomenon. So is it the Schumann resonance? I mean, what's essentially introduced this experience to humanity? What is it that we're experiencing?
Okay. What you are, well, first of all, the difference between you and the people who are trying to convince you that really nothing's going on here, okay? The difference between you and them is that you were ready to accept a bigger picture explanation. You're looking for something more than just the pat explanation. It doesn't really exist. It's just all in your imagination, and these things couldn't possibly happen because, you know, materialism says they can't. So you were ready to go beyond that. That's the difference between all the people that are here in this room and the people that you argue with that are you know, that you're having the problem with, who are the non-believers, the ones that just will not look at the facts. So it's the ready from those that are not ready. And you're never going to convince the people that are not ready. They're not able to stretch their mind that far to come to that conclusion that conflicts with what they know to be true, which is materialism. They know that that's true. It's part of our culture. So it's going to be very difficult to change a mind. These people are just not ready for that yet. Now, what I said was that the Mandela effect isn't just one monolithic thing. There's not just one cause to it. There are multiple things that add to it. It's not just a simple explanation, but there are at least four that I identified. There may be others, four different kind of streams that add to it. And as I said, they're all not equal. It's not like each one adds 1/4 to it. Some of the ones that I talked about, the ones about the fact that we pattern match, that is just a fact. That's how we function. That's how our brain and that's how our consciousness functions. We pattern match. And when we pattern match, we come to conclusions. We see things that become part of our reality, and they're our facts. I saw that. That's what it said. That becomes a fact of us. But how we receive the data is pattern matching. So that is just one way that these discrepancies can take place. And I don't think it's the primary way. I said the primary way was that last one that I talked about, where the larger consciousness system just puts data into your data stream that defines something that is impossible and outside this reality. And it's just to get you to the point that you accept reality as being larger than just the material world. So there's several streams that feed it, though. And the pattern matching is just one. The effect of collective consciousness, that's another. You have ideas of the way things are. And here's another way to put it, is that nobody thinks that they have a belief. Everybody sees their belief as a fact. That's just the nature of belief. So if you believe something, well, I believe that this is true, then that is a fact to you. You believe that it's true, it's a fact. So you see, nobody believes they have a belief. Everybody thinks they just have the facts. So that's why you're not going to convince other people very easily. And what this does, this Mandela effect, is an effect that the larger consciousness system is propagating through multiple ways that convinces people that what they've been told is a fact, which is this buttoned down material world, it's larger than that. There's strange things going on here. There's things that we can't explain. It makes you start searching for answers. So that's the whole point of it, to bump people out of their rut. So it's just not a monolithic thing. There's lots of things that contribute to it. Collective consciousness will change what you think are facts. The fact that we do pattern matching will change what you think are facts. And same for everybody else. And then we all talk to each other and we think we all have this set of facts. Well, the folks here that are aware of this Mandela effect and realize that it is a real thing that's happening here, well, now that's become a fact for them. But the others who haven't gotten to that point, who aren't ready, it's not a fact for them. That's why you're going to run into this intransigence when you try to explain it. They can't see it because it conflicts with facts.
I think that's a great answer, Tom. We appreciate that. We've got one more question. We got time for one more question before we get ready for our next speaker. So next up we have Ted. Is that right, Ted?
That's right.
Excellent. Ted, your question, go ahead.
Tom, I wanted to thank you so much for being here, because I just sat in the back of this room and wrote down probably 3 pages worth of questions that I could ask you about this. And I really did. I sat down. And I wrote down, I was like, okay, I got to boil this all down to one question. So the IUOCs that come from the LCS, that allow us to become these avatars. My question has to do with doppelgangers and multiple personalities. Can these IUOCs inhabit multiple avatars, and or they combine to enter into one avatar? And the reason I ask this question is that so far in this existence, we've seen every generation surpass the next. I'm wondering, like Einstein that we saw, could end up combining with like a Feynman or a Hawking and combine into one avatar, or separate and put itself in different positions in order to continue what the LCS ultimate goal is, which I don't know. Maybe you can allude on that. But my question is about the combination and the partitioning of IUOCs into avatars.
Okay. Generally, it does not work that way. Generally, there's just one IUOC, that is doing the choices for one avatar. But this is a virtual reality, and this is a computer-based. It's a computed reality, and when you have a computed reality, almost anything can happen. And as we know, anything that can happen usually does happen, but that's only in the margins. It's only in the 10, 20 sigma, way out under the, in the tail of the curve. So things like that may happen very infrequently. So I won't say that's impossible, because there's very little that's impossible, but I will say that that is extremely unlikely. It won't happen very often. Each person, each individuated unit of consciousness is on their own path, learning and growing through each lifetime. And yes, there are multiple lifetimes. You can't figure this all out in one shot. So no, that's not typical. And they do not group up like that, like a Feynman and an Einstein get together and decide that they'll play one avatar. It doesn't work like that. Each avatar is trying to lower their own entropy and evolve the quality of their consciousness, and that's just their thing. Now, is it possible for more than one consciousness to be making choices for an avatar? Yeah, that happens sometimes. That'll happen. Is it possible for one consciousness to leave an avatar and another take its place? Yes, that happens sometimes. So again, but these are off in the margins. This is not the way it usually works. Special cases, special things happen. But I don't think the idea that scientists would get together to make then a super scientist, it doesn't work like that. So no, that isn't how it happens. One thing I'm good at that I really excel at, and that is creating questions. I find that every time I answer a question, I create, another 100 questions in the answer. So it's just the way this is. So I'm sorry to leave you with so many questions.
Isn't that the nature of science? For every question answered, you find 3 more that are unanswered?
I think it's just like that, yes. I feel bad that I can't sit here for the next 3 hours and answer your questions, because I know you have lots of them, but that's not the way this works. So I have to stand by and let other people talk to you.
I think we could do a whole conference just on your work if you really wanted to. Ladies and gentlemen, we really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you.
And I personally thank you so much, Tom. We shall see you at the panel discussion this evening, sir.
Yes.
Thank you so
I will
much.
be there.
Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, sir.